Hey, my name is Tim Buell. I'm a drummer living in Nashville, Tennessee. Today, what we're talking about is Finale for Drummers, and this is actually part 3 of this series. And what we're going to do today is we're going to take this notation and transform it into this. I'm going to walk you through step by step how you can take your notation you've created in Finale and transform it into MIDI that you can then load into a DAW, which stands for Digital Audio Workstation, or simply put, recording software. Now, what is MIDI and why should you care about it? MIDI is a digital communications standard that basically lets music gear and music software all kind of talk to each other. For our purposes today, what MIDI is going to allow us to do is export our notation as MIDI from Finale, and then we're going to import it into a recording software relatively seamlessly and easily. The process of converting notation into MIDI is really helpful for a couple of reasons. First, being able to convert your notation into MIDI is going to allow you to be able to collaborate with maybe producers or musicians who don't use notation software as their primary kind of format for songwriting or arranging. A lot of producers use programs like Pro Tools, Logic, GarageBand, and it's going to be really helpful for you to be able to export as MIDI and hand them a MIDI file that they can then use in their recording software to enable better collaboration. What moving your notation via MIDI over to a DAW also allows you to do is use a more robust feature set for doing things like assigning sounds to the parts that you want, as well as get really granular with the playback and how that sounds. So if you're really looking to take your notation and turn it into audio that's very high quality and sounds more human-like, moving your notation from Finale into a recording software via MIDI is really going to allow you to kind of dial in exactly how the audio will end up sounding. So today I'm going to walk you through editing the Finale percussion MIDI map, how to export your notation from Finale as MIDI, how to import that MIDI file into a DAW. Today we're going to be using Logic Pro. And lastly, common issues that you'll usually run into when importing MIDI into a DAW and ways that you can kind of work around it. So let's get started. First, we need some drum notation to kind of get this all started. And today we're going to use this example of drum notation here. It's actually the transcription from part 2 of this series. The reason I wanted to use this is, one, you can actually go back in the series and see me create this notation start to finish. But 2, this notation is kind of slightly swung and has a very human performance. So this will be a good way to demonstrate kind of the power of MIDI and the power of loading this into a DAW, because we're actually going to try and get it as feeling as slightly swung and human as the original performance. So before you export your MIDI from Finale, you might want to tweak the percussion MIDI map in Finale. Once you load MIDI into your DAW, that DAW is going to have a pre-assigned kind of MIDI map for what sounds need to play and what notes. And if you already know what your DAW needs or what your software that you're going to be loading MIDI into needs, you can actually edit all of that in the Finale MIDI map before you export, and that way, whatever MIDI you export from Finale will load perfectly and sync up exactly like you want with your program that you're loading it into. If you don't know that, don't worry. I'm going to show you how to change all of that once you do load it into whatever recording software you're going to be working with. But let me show you really quickly in Finale, if you do want to change what MIDI notes are assigned to what percussion note heads, you can do that. So with this document selected, we're going to hit Control K. This brings up our score manager. And we're going to go over here to Settings. We're going to go to Edit our drum set. And then we're going to go right up to the top here and hit New, where it says Current Percussion MIDI, General MIDI. And this pulls up your percussion MIDI map. And from here, you can edit whatever you want. So as you can see here, the bass drum is assigned MIDI note number 35. The kick drum is MIDI note 36. The snare drum is MIDI note 38. So if you know whatever software you're going to be loading the MIDI into, whether it's Logic, like I'm going to be using, or Pro Tools or whatever, if you know the MIDI map of that software you're going to be using, before you export from Finale, you can come in here and change, you can go to the hi-hat, double click 42, and if you know it's going to be, let's say it's going to be 47, you can type 47 here, and now this MIDI note in Finale will export and transfer over onto MIDI 47 of whatever program you're loading into. So if you know the MIDI map of whatever software you're going to end up loading this all into, this can make your life much easier because you can kind of match all this stuff up before you export from Finale. But if you don't know, that's totally okay. MIDI is a great technology because it's so easy to work with. So I'm actually not going to change any of this, and I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to export this as MIDI, and I'm going to change all of this in Logic after I import it. So our second step is let's export this notation as MIDI, and that's very easy to do in Finale. All you have to do is go up to File, you can go to Export, and we're going to go to MIDI file. And here you can name the file whatever you need to name it and hit save, and it will save it as a MIDI file. When I export, I make sure that I put all of the information on one MIDI track and not spread out across multiple. Now that we have that done, let's actually hop over to Logic Pro to load up all this MIDI, change it around, and then we're gonna get a beautiful audio file of our drumming when we're done with it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna open up Logic Pro X or 10, whatever you wanna call it, and I'm gonna hit Command N to open up a new project. And I'm gonna change the tempo to the project to 80 because that's actually the tempo of the notation that we just did. And then I'm gonna create an empty project, make sure the sample rate is 48, that's what I want, and I'm gonna hit choose. And now this loads up this screen right here. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this. You can load up just one of the standard Logic drummers, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go down to AU Instruments and I'm gonna go to Tune Track and load up a track of Superior Drummer. This is what Superior Drummer looks like, and I am a big fan of when I'm doing MIDI drums, I really like Superior Drummer's interface and their sounds, the flexibility they have, all of it. So this is what I'll be using, but you can use any standard MIDI drum editor that comes with whatever DAW you're working in. This is the stock Logic drum set designer. You can use that, but like I said, I'm gonna be using Superior Drummer today because I prefer the sounds and kind of the workflow of it. So now that we have our Superior Drummer set up for MIDI drums, now what we need to do is import the MIDI that we just exported from Finale. So you can go up to File, go to Import, select MIDI file, and then find where you've saved that MIDI file on your computer and hit Import. I'm gonna hit no to the tempo information because I already set that in the project. And don't worry about the SMPTE, that's for video, it's not a big deal. And as you can see, I put all the MIDI information on one MIDI track, and that's why you can see here, this MIDI track has all this data and the others don't. The others are blank. So what I can do is I can actually highlight all of these, hit backspace again, and those are all gone. And now I can play this MIDI data and it's playing as a piano because this MIDI is currently on a piano track. So all I need to do is slide up that MIDI onto the MIDI drum track we created earlier and we get something like this. So we're pretty close. We are in the ballpark of what we want this to end up sounding like, but there's a couple things that I want to change. So in this final step, I'm gonna show you what I normally change after importing MIDI to make the playback a little more human, make it sound a little bit more like real drums being played by a real drummer. No matter what, when you're moving from notation over to MIDI or from MIDI over to notation, there's always going to be a little bit of cleanup. There's just really no way to capture all the detail you need from notation over to DAW. So I would just get used to a process like I'm about to show you of kind of selecting what you need to make the notation once you've imported as MIDI feel more human. And the first couple things that jump out is all of these notes are colored light green, which means their velocity is very low, which gives this performance kind of a very like computery and not human tone and sound to it. all of the notes are kind of just an equal velocity. There's not a lot of texture and tone going on. So we need to change that. And also, in this original performance, I'm playing a lot of backbeats and ghost notes, and the snare drums don't really sound as diverse, even on this first fill. Some of the ghost notes are actually playing as rim clicks. And then all of the snare drum notes are kind of just a mush of the same velocity. So the first thing I want to do is find all my backbeats and make sure that they sound like backbeats. And how I can do that in Logic is I can actually select this backbeat here and select same colored notes. And what that does is it goes through and it finds all of the same colored notes. And as you can see, it's kind of selected all of the snare drum backbeats because I write all my backbeats with an accent over it. So what I want to do is, now that those are all selected, I want to go through and I actually want to drag this up so that they sound more like backbeats. So that's already sounding much better, but even in this first measure, there's still a couple snare drum notes that, aren't necessarily popping like I want them to. So I'm gonna right click them, select those, and you can see there's now another layer of snare drum note that I'm gonna drag up the velocity on here too. That's sounding a lot better. So now what I'm gonna do is drag all these ghost notes that are on this line down here, and I'm just gonna simply drag them up a line. And I'm actually gonna undo that because I'm gonna click here and I'm gonna actually drag the velocity down on them a little bit because they're sounding a little too in your face. Now I'm gonna drag them up. So the snare drum is now sounding much, much happier, much more like a real performance. The next thing I want to do is I want to take all the velocities of the kick drums, the toms, and bring them up so that they're a little more in your face. So my kick drum is C1 here. I'm gonna select all of them by clicking that note, and I'm just gonna drag the velocity slider up. I'm not gonna quite do it that much. Okay, that works. I'm gonna find my toms and do a similar thing. Drag those up. Drag those up. Now the velocity and the dynamics are sounding pretty good. So now what I want to do is I actually want to go through and add in this kind of 16th note swung thing that the original performance sounded like, because the original performance wasn't straight 16th notes, they were slightly swung. This is where things get a little tricky, and what you're gonna have to do is you kind of have to do this by hand, but you can do it pretty quickly. So I wanna take any spots where there's just 16th notes. Anything faster than a 16th note, I need to not include. But on this first measure, everything besides the very first couple of notes are 16th notes, and what I can do is I can select them, go down to this menu and hit swing B, which is a 16th note swing that isn't all the way swung, but not all the way straight, and I can select them there. And you can see they all moved a little bit, and now they sound slightly swung. That sounds much more human. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to every measure, and we're going to just hit this little Q, and it's going to slightly swing everything that is selected. The only things I'm not gonna select right now are things that are faster than a 16th note, because they will need kind of special attention. So I'm just going everywhere there's 16th notes and making sure to select all of these. So now we have a performance like this. And I noticed that in the sheet music, this ghost note right here, this ghost note right here is actually supposed to be a buzzed stroke. So I'm going to drag that up one, and I'm actually going to bring the velocity up on that. All right, so this fill needs a little bit of attention. These first three notes need to be 16th note triplets. And then these last two notes kind of need to be swung 16th note triplets as well. So let's make these 16th note triplets, and let's make these 16th note triplets. Let's see if that sounds better. I'm going to take these two notes and put them just a little bit closer. And these 30-second notes get a little weird. So what I'm going to first do is I'm going to go to them and just make sure that they're all coming out as straight 30-second notes, which they weren't. And then I'm going to take these hi-hat notes and bring the velocity down and bring the velocity up on these ghost notes. Now it sounds like this. And that sounds much more like a professional kind of audio of the original performance. So again, this is what it sounds like. Put down in the comments any questions you might have or anything you want to see in this Finale for Drummers YouTube series. Go ahead and subscribe to this channel if you liked it. There's other links down there of free downloads and things like that that you can get that I've created. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.